Patient. Well, that's good because I've shortened it a little bit. I'll go through it very quickly so you can see some of the key elements of it, and then I'll kind of, oh, good, okay, Lisa. So I'll still go through it fairly quickly, but just to give people kind of like orient them to kind of what we're talking about. This work, so I'll just kind of jump in. So, based on, as Rushika, it's always, as you told, it's always awkward kind of sitting there listening to people talk about you and your introduction. But I've just been doing, like many of you, I've been doing this for a long time in lots of different contexts. I still spend lots of time in classrooms. My one of my major concerns right now is just it seems like as I go into schools, we're having a lot more difficult time providing quality programming for our kids with their extensive support needs. Most of my work has been around our kids with their more complex needs. I have worked because I'm also a behavior analyst. I get called in for kids with milder disabilities, but most of my work has been with kids that are intellectual disability, limited speaking repertoires. Anyway, what I experience nationally is when I go into programs, I see maybe mediocre kind of programming. And I think that I worry that given some of the contextual things that are happening right now, we have potential to backslide a little bit. And so we've been speaking a lot, writing a little bit on how to maybe bolster and support teachers to help lift them up in this challenging time to make sure they're doing better. So I'm gonna kind of jump in. I'm pretty easygoing, so interrupt me at any point, but I'm gonna kind of go quickly through some of the presentation that that you might have watched, but I'm going to do it again for our folks that haven't seen it, but there are folks that we have seen. I'm going to make sure that we don't spend too much time. So again, as I mentioned before, we're in a really difficult time, and I think that many of us, right, our employment, our people that are guiding us from a district level all the way down to our building levels. I worry that sometimes under the pressure of all the things we're expected to do, that us as a field, we sometimes forget our purpose, right? And you folks that work in inclusive education, you sadly acknowledge probably you see that there's still there's still a long way to go in terms of people not otherizing our students or the folks that we work with. And so my concern is that we lose sight of what matters. And as we talked a little bit in your video clip, the idea is what matters is helping somebody get to a good life, right? And so I just recently wrote a paper that I'll refer to in a minute about that is under review about kind of inclusive practice. And like for a long time, we've kind of had this debate about, do we do functional skills? Do we do academic skills? And I think that sometimes that those types of debates, um, we get lost in those weeds. It really should be like right now, what can we give our students that will help them have a meaningful life? And when we talk about those meaningful life, we're talking about things like employment, building relationships, being able to contribute to their families, being able to have some sense of autonomy and agency to be able to experience the world in the way that you choose, being able to have money and be able to spend that money and be able to save and participate in an economy. All those things that are ways that we exercise our freedoms and choices are powerful. So I also in the presentation I brought up this slide. Excuse me, really quick. I'm trying to get rid of the okay, we're recording button. So I'm going to unshare for 1 second so I can do that. Pop back in. Thank you. Um, I like to remind us that I think that we teach the environment we want folks to have. And so, and that's not only kind of a pie in the sky idealistic thing. I think that it's a very behavior analytic teaching science thing. If I teach kids in the present to respond and engage in activities that don't look like the real world, it's very difficult for me to, it's not very reasonable for me to expect that suddenly they're going to be successful in a world that looks completely different, especially for a lot of our kids that have difficulties with generalizing, observational learning, those types of things. So we're talking about kids with complex needs. That's common for many of them. And so if we're teaching kids, we spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time in classrooms. I still see kids, maybe not in your districts, right? But doing these file folders where they're laminating, pieces of taking laminated pieces of Velcro and, matching over and over again. That's not necessarily meaningful instruction. And again, when I work in districts, we try to not make teachers feel bad about what they're doing because, reality, if you're just one of you and you've got 10 really hard kids, there are going to be times of the day that are not actively engaged in instruction, especially our folks in those segregated programs. But I ask them to worry about it. I ask them to think about how much time their kids are engaged in these tasks that don't represent what the real world looks like and probably will not be moving them towards and meaningful skills to get them there. But again, if we teach kids in more naturalistic settings where things are more complex, they're more likely going to be successful, or the hope is they're going to be more successful in those typical settings or these integrated settings. So I've kind of posited this Mayo versus hospice approach to educational programming. Um, the idea here is that the Mayo Clinic, when we look at the Mayo Clinic, we've got an interdisciplinary approach. We've got folks that know what they're doing. It's data-based. But to me, the most important part of that is that people don't stay at the Mayo Clinic, right? So if we think about special education service delivery, they don't stay in a place forever, and then we give them intensive instruction. There's an assumption that we need to get them back into an integrated life. And that's really what I think special education should be, right? But then there's this hospice approach. And again, all of us have hospice, well, many of us have had hospice, had to rely on hospice services for family members. So this isn't really um, crapping on hospice care because there is a time and a place for that. But there's this idea that when we think about that for programming for kids, there's this assumption that there's not life at the end of the road. There's not this independent, there's not this agency. And so what we see is we see accommodation over teaching. They don't need to get new skills. We just kind of need to take care of them until they leave us. And with that comes decreased expectations for learning and complexity of supports. And unfortunately, this is sometimes special education service delivery. Um, and so we also talked a little bit about this idea of inclusion-oriented practice. And so when we get lost in those that discussion around, are kids fully included? Are they not included? There's, as I said before, we've been writing about it for decades, and there's arguments in the field. Even in the last 5 years, there's been very powerful papers back and forth about inclusion, arguing the effectiveness of inclusion. But I believe that an inclusion-oriented practice is a different way to think about it. And this really came from was partially came from a paper that I wrote with Michael Giangreco when he used the word inclusion-oriented schools. And I think last year at the Urban Collaborative Conference, he actually said the reason he says that is because he doesn't see many like really inclusive schools. And so, inclusion-oriented practice is the idea that we can take what we're using, right? No matter where they are, no matter where a student is, and be orienting the work that we do so the kids have more success in those integrated settings. That's kids, even if you're in a segregated school, there's work that can be done that moving them towards a less segregated placement. So again, we start with this enviable life. All people can have pretty cool lives. We make every educational decision informed by whether it brings them closer to that life. And then we always ask that question, well, do they still need to be segregated to get there? And then we oriented our most effective practices towards those inclusive outcomes. So again, the idea here was that no matter where folks are, we can be doing inclusion-oriented work. There's not segregated, only included. There is this idea at the end of the road, kids need to have access to it. Kids need to be independent and participating in integrated settings. And so no matter where folks are, we always have to be working towards that. And the reason we bring that up is that it's not really at the end of the road. I mean, it's all times we need to be asking how much longer does our kid need to be segregated in this setting? And if they're in the setting right now, what are we doing to get them out of there? So a couple years ago, we wrote this paper talking about this kind of doable approach. And this was really um, the iteration of a model that we've been building around the ALCOT that we'll talk about. So again, rethinking teaching, getting some assessment, and having teachers engage in measurable goals. Has some recent research showing that teachers, when they're able to write their goals and construct their goals, they're more effective at meeting them. We build partnerships, and then we change that environment. And then we make sure we're monitoring progress. So the idea is we take what a teacher does and we kind of apply that IEP lens to it. It's like there's a million things teachers can do probably in their day more efficiently, more effectively, more stuff, but they're not going to do that. I remember my early days as a consultant, first out of the classroom, I would come in and have this big list of here's what you need to do. And I'd come back a couple of weeks later, they didn't do it, and I would be frustrated. And like many of our colleagues, our younger coaching colleagues, we're pulled out of our classroom into these roles. And because we're good with kids, but I didn't know how to work with adults. And so again, I would show up, do my thing, but I was much less effective at that time. So the idea is we just prioritize a few things. We really focus with the teacher. We provide the support that they need. We let them have choice in that. And then we start getting them involved in this ongoing, continual professional development cycle. So again, this idea is there's no such thing as a bad educator. Again, we people would argue that, but again, from my kind of behavior analytic world, there's no such thing as somebody that's broken or bad. It really just means people don't have the skills they need, or they're exhibiting certain skills at too high of levels. So you got the teacher that's yelling at kids all the time, or some skills at not enough levels. So maybe there's not planning happening. And the good news is we know how to change behavior. We've got, almost a century now of hard science showing us how to do those things. So we start taking teachers as learners. So again, we take teachers and we say, just like our kids, teachers behave. We start looking at those things in the environment that affect teacher behavior, and we start changing those things. And then we really kind of honed into this idea of like change is probably should be less like this, where we expect a brand new teacher who doesn't have anything to go to master teacher in a very short period of time, to this place where it's gradual improvement. And the sad part about this, and we have to acknowledge, is that kids are waiting on us to get better. But there's just no other solution. We have so many alternative routes now that folks are entering programs with a lot less preparation in many cases. Sometimes it can work out great if it's a strong induction program, there's good mentorship, but really, if you're in the classrooms, right, seeing multiple classrooms, you're seeing folks just not having the skills that they need. There's been a review over the last 5 years, about 4 or 5, Morin, Hamrick, some other folks that have actually worked, have surveyed teachers in classrooms, and their lack of familiarity with like just evidence-based practices is really low, which speaks to some problems with preparation. So we developed this ALCOT. And so this really started many years ago for me. I was directing our statewide technical assistance center on autism throughout the state. We were working the Department of Education to kind of scale up evidence-based practices. And then I needed to figure out a way that I could get in quickly and look at a classroom and do an evaluation. So we developed this checklist. It was originally 37 items. If you take a look at it, on the left side is you can observe it or you can report it. So if a teacher tells me they're doing, I don't see it, we're going to go ahead and say that's fine, because we'll figure that out during coaching, that the skill's not there or not. You should be able to get what you need in an hour observation, asking a few questions. The protocol has those questions for you. And then most cases we've been using it as a self-evaluation tool. So like I'll go out to districts and we'll sit with all the teachers and we'll spend some time talking about what programs should look like, and we'll stop at each section and have them actually score themselves. And they leave with a measurable goal to work on. So it kind of got so I'm doing this very quickly. So I'm going to slow myself down a minute. Does anybody have any questions so far? Is this all kind of resonating or making sense with folks, or at least from your perspective where you are? Good. Um, so there's 6 sections, and what I'm going to do now is just kind of go through and reflect on each of those sections for you. The first section is about environmental supports for safety and predictability. Again, my experience is that when I work with teachers in different states on this. This people have this, right? Most folks, have had an Autism 101 thing, or they remember it in one of their courses that kids should have visual schedules. People score okay on this, but the idea is that team members can observe all areas of the classroom so kids are safe. There's visual supports or tactile cues for those kids with visual impairments, right? Are displayed throughout the classroom. There's use of individualized and group schedules. Teaching signals clearly indicate when transitions are approaching, so no more just like, "Oh, come on, guys." It's like, guys, check your timer. We're gonna in 3 minutes, we're going to our next class. For our little guys, we might be going, we got to switch one, we might be counting down for them. But again, the idea is we're not changing things on them abruptly. And then we're going to see lots of use of assistive technology. And again, within the protocol itself, it operationalizes what these look like. I actually have a protocol here. And so in each of these items, you kind of see that there is a what is it, partially evidence, and then there's a box here that describes for administrators why this is important. And I think that's really helpful for some of our new folks that haven't had experience working with kids with severe disabilities or complex needs. Um, we have visual instructional supports, and this is where people really struggle, I think, because I think I've been in three different teacher preparation programs now. So I was at the University of Louisville, University of North Carolina, Charlotte, now at UK. Um, I think that we don't get teachers in the habit during their programs. Usually they'll do like they'll have to do some lesson plans for a class, and then we expect them to be competent on it. So they're getting all sorts of support in this class for their lesson plans. And so we're not even sure if they're to acquisition independently, and then we expect them to maintain and generalize when it's in the classroom. I think it's a failure on our part oftentimes. But anyway, lesson plans are used to guide instruction. Systematic instruction plans are used to guide repeated or embedded trial instruction. So the idea here is they're systematic instruction plans are these mini plans that are basically a recipe for paraprofessionals, other folks to be able to implement. So say this, if a child responds this way, you do this. And they can be written for embedded skills in a general education program. They can be written for skills that when we're pulling a kid out, doing some resource with, or we're going to see them in an intensive program. But it makes sure that programs are consistent, that programming is consistent. So a child's data do not fall down just because one paraprofessional is doing it one way, the teacher's doing it a different way. All team members are engaged in instruction-related activities when not on break. Uh, Believe it or not, maybe not in your states, but I still walk into classrooms and there's people sitting at their desks while one teacher's trying to manage, the whole class. Team members are positioned to facilitate peer interaction and learning from classroom teacher in non-segregated settings. Data are collected on multiple student objectives. Data are plotted on line graphs. I still teach teachers to, once they take data, turn the page and plot a dot. Because we're still finding that teachers will take their data and they'll import it at a later time, much later, and often they can't see the day-to-day improvements they're making, which to me I think is really powerful. That's what reinforces good teaching behavior. I did something that works, right? We'll say to teachers a lot, like, well, I'll ask teachers, why do you do this? And they're like, it's for the kids. But if you're not taking data and you don't see progress, that's not why you're doing it. That's not how reinforcement works. You may like working with the kids, you may see improvement over time, but the things that keep you practicing good teacher behaviors day to day are observable, measurable student progress. And then team members report the use of database decision-making rules. I laugh. It wasn't until, gosh, 15 years later that I had like a rule for data collection. We just kind of ambled around. Well, you should probably take it. Herring and then Diane Browder later kind of broke out, had a really simple rule for teaching kids with extensive support needs. Take data 3 times a week. Every two weeks, make a decision whether they made 5% progress. If they haven't made 5% progress, rethink your teaching. All right, so the next section was about instruction. And this is probably one of the more complex ones. So again, team members provide instructional opportunities in non-segregated settings. Team members modify or adapt materials. Team members facilitate peer supports or peer support networks. Team members generally deliver the same directive only once and then use prompts or feedback to ensure a student correct response. I always use the example, if we're in a group, I'll say, Rushika, what's my middle name? So you know, Rusha, you know what it is. Didn't you invite me to speak? What's my middle name? And so we usually, when I do this, it'll be real awkward. You guys will feel awkward for her. She just doesn't know. So it should be, Rushka, what's my middle name? One, two, three, four. It's Clyde. What's my middle name? She says Clyde, and I come right back to it. So again, you keep pacing going. There's this kind of thing where people will say, well, you just give them lots and lots of wait time. And with Rushika, if she doesn't know, if she doesn't know it, wait time's not going to help her.
Exactly. No, it wasn't helping me. I was like, wait, am I supposed to respond here? It's not working. I don't know what your middle name is.
So that's a real simple, we try to get the teachers wait, ask and wait, or wait and prompt. And so again, ask them, wait about 3 to 5 seconds. They don't get, go ahead, give them the answer, then come back to it. And that's a really nice habit for your whole teams to get into. But anyway, team members generally deliver the same. Oh, excuse me. Team members provide consistent feedback, age appropriate materials. We're using preference assessments. Again, the idea is that we'll say a kid isn't motivated, but when the fact is we're the ones that are supposed to motivate kids. And so we have to find out what those reinforcers are. We're teaching academic skills aligned to the general education curriculum. It's the law, right? And then teaching members to use methods to promote generalization. So they're not teaching kids into a box. They're actually using those strategies that we know will help sure that they're able to break free of that instructional arrangement and use skills in real life. The final three, and I'll kind of go through these quickly so I have some time to talk, is we have communication supports, which is kind of a real soapbox of mine. Some colleagues in mine have over the last couple of years have published a couple papers making it very clear that teacher prep is not doing a very good job of preparing teachers to support kids with complex communication needs. So all kids have a functional communication system. That means they're using words, sign, pictures, or writing to be able to ask for things and protest things at the most basic level, right? We're seeing it observed multiple times across multiple partners, instruction, communication instruction. We're seeing students have access to communication supports at all times. Again, I always remind folks if a kid has a device and we take it away, that's restraint. And then team members teach and arrange the environment to facilitate peer interactions. And the final two is related to behavior supports and staff interaction. So behavior supports, as we know, is killing a lot of our folks. Again, I think they're not getting sufficient training. It's one of the reasons that people are trying to leave the classroom. Um, is one, our expectations posted and taught. Team members teach and reinforce students' requests for access to escape. So again, if a kid can ask for something, he doesn't need to engage in problem behavior to get it. Team members provide praise or preferred stimuli following appropriate behavior. Team members refrain from frequent negative feedback. Team members provide opportunities for students to self-monitor and evaluate their performance. Team members avoid the use of restraint. BIPs are written and follow non-educational settings, and team member interactions with students promote dignity. So these things are like keep our hands off kids, not talking about kids in their presence, those types of things. And then finally, oh, let me go back here. We talked about educational team interactions. So we got collaborative teams. Paraprofessionals are given actual supports. They know what they're supposed to do every day. They're given coaching and support when they need it. And then we have some established methods for families. So that's the tool in itself. I'll tell you how it's been used thus far is lots of districts, teacher preparation programs, they'll use it to support teacher coaching. So we have some colleagues that use it in their preparation program. So like when alt-cert people are in their classrooms, they start them when they first get in there and then they intermittently score and see their improvement over time. We've had some SPDIGs, the state professional development grants use it as a tool to measure and support their teachers as they move forward. Um, I'm amazed. Again, I'm not, it's somebody that does lots of things, that the ALCOT, like, oh, yeah, people reach out to me and be like, oh, we're using this, and people find it really user friendly. And so that makes me happy that something that you made, at least people are using it. But I think the reason is it just, it's very pragmatic. It's not asking for the Maserati of programs, right? But it's also not, getting for you guys remember from the 80s, the Yugo, you're not, you're not, so again, it should get you there, should last. Your kids will kind of get what they need if they have all those components. So within that, the overall model, which is really important to me, is that once teachers are able to use this and come up with some prioritization, So we do this in different ways. We have them prioritize them themselves. We work at the team. Our technical assistance folks will work with them, and they'll develop some goals for themselves. Usually we say one or two, up to three, but again, it depends on the complexity of the goals. We have them write some objectives. So maybe it's going to be all students will have a communication system. First, they're going to identify for all their students with complex communication needs a response form. And then maybe the next one is they're going to increase the number of trials, right? So they're teaching a kid to communicate, but they only do it during snack time or only when the speech pathologist is there. So the kid's getting like 20 opportunities a day when most kids talk hundreds of times a day. And so we're going to beef that up. Or maybe all staff are going to implement high quality reading instruction supports. So maybe they're going to implement the system of least prompts with 80% accuracy. So the goals can be around fidelity. So if you guys are familiar, a lot of our reading with kids with complex needs involves shared reading or shared stories, adapted books. And so again, we usually use the system of least prompts to promote to help them when they're answering those comprehension questions. Or all staff will be able to implement a scripted reading program with 90% accuracy, which again, when our teachers don't know how to teach reading or do not have all the materials, sometimes the first thing we do is we get a scripted program in there because at least gets instruction moving. Then once they get comfortable, they can make adaptations as needed. Maybe all students are going to increase their opportunities to learn within general education program. General education teachers will increase the rate in which they direct opportunities to students with extensive support needs during lessons. So we see that a lot. We saw this in our Project Impact, where at first teachers would sit and let the paraprofessional or the special education teacher deliver all the instruction. And we're like, no, we want the general education teacher to direct questions to our students with severe disabilities. And actually, so the interaction is between them. Um, or its general education peers will increase the rate in which they interact with students with extensive support needs in general education settings. So again, these are all things that we can take 15 minutes observation, come in, count the number of times, and then we can graph improvements over time. So again, that kind of IEP model, that measurable goals for themselves. And then we have them develop steps. What's really nice about these steps is you can imagine some of these goals may take a while for a teacher to show progress, especially if it's not like an increase in rate or something. And so what we can have teachers do is develop steps to meet these goals, and then they can graph their performance of those steps. So instead of an up and down on a graph, it's actually cumulative. So you'll start seeing the graph go up this way, which again, I like this idea of visual analysis where teachers can actually see their progress and show their growth over time. So that's kind of the model in terms of the assessment part of it. And then we just talked a little bit about a couple simple things. So one, getting teachers together. I really kind of believe that some of our teachers are not responsive to us as coaches when we go into a classroom. There are data to suggest that on some skills, when our coaches come in, our behavior changes. When they leave, those changes aren't sustained. So we have to give people the skills to implement. We have to give people behavior change strategies to use when there's not another adult there. So things like interacting with a colleague. People care about what their colleagues think. I think I said in that session, like if I said to Carol, I was like, Carol, you know what? I don't think you're probably that great at your prompting strategies. Carol would be like, who's this guy? I don't know him. But if you heard that another close colleague in your building said you're not a very good teacher, you'd be like, oh, right. So I think those things really matter. And we have some strong data early from the 90s showing that we just put teachers together with some PD, we get more progress for them. A lot less focus on telling, more showing, and then changing the environment. So again, I always say like a baby consultant can tell somebody what to do, but most times even a middle schooler can go into a classroom and tell you what's wrong with it, right? The better ones actually can show people what we're supposed to do. And then the best ones are able to leave nuggets in the classroom to help a teacher when they're not there. So whether I give you a schedule or some sort of visual support. We have teachers that we were working with some teachers that weren't asking enough questions. So we put sticky notes in their books to remind them to ask questions during literacy activities. So all those supports we would use for kids, we can kind of scale up for ourselves. And as I said before, have folks monitor their progress. We worked with a district where we had them every 2 weeks report, meet with another person, and then report on that. Um, And again, the ones that stuck with it actually were able to meet their goals. So we've been proposing some large scale grant funded uh, models that look a lot like this. So again, teachers would go in, they would do some goal setting, they would meet, and then we would have them report on their progress every 2 weeks, and then kind of meet in a larger PLC, bringing all the group together. And then that whole time they would be getting kind of high quality professional development. So again, we've kind of thought through this through several research cycles, and we keep getting great feedback. So we think that this is kind of the approach that we're going to continue to be heading in over the next couple of years. That was a lot. I just threw a bunch of things at you, but I want you to write down this email if you want to talk more. I'm happy to Zoom. For again, I love talking about this stuff. This isn't a solicitation. You don't have to pay me to talk to me about anything. You just want to talk about how some of this works. Send me a time. We'll schedule. We'll do some brainstorming. Um, oh, and this again, if you weren't at this is my older dog Lily, who passed away recently, and my wife's a dog trainer, so we, we would just say that we're all trainable. We're all growing. All right, I'm gonna take this off. And let's just say, let's talk for a few minutes. So let's do you guys if there's a question that you're like, yes, but if not, is there something that resonated with you in the larger talk or this abbreviated version that you'd like to chat about? Yes.
So I think for me, it's the coaching thing because I'm a consultant. And if
Yeah.
I go into a classroom and we give some ideas or suggestions, or we might even model certain language for teachers, we don't know what happens after we're gone. So I like this whole idea of um it's just more, what can I say? More frequent and more of a conversation that seems a little bit more natural than
Yeah.
maybe what
So,
we have done.
I think if it's possible, and it doesn't always work where you are, but if you're in a place where you have almost cohorts of folks. So Carol, let's say you're in your area and you've got 6 teachers you have to be working with. You pull them together as a cohort and you say, okay, let's do this ALCOT or whatever tool that you use together, and they're all going to have different areas in which they want to grow. But you find folks that are similar and you pair them together and say, here's what we're going to do. I want for you guys to just have a 10-minute call or a Zoom or email where you connect between those times. And then I'm going to send you every 2 weeks, maybe a Google form that says, hey, I'm making progress on my goals. I'm not crushed it. Right. And that signals to you of like, oh, I better get into this person because they're not making progress. So
Mhm.
you've got a couple points before you kind of touch points before you get there. I remember there was one time when I was looking for a large district and I had 76 folks on my caseload and there were kids that were included and all their team members. So you're talking 76 kids, but then the 4 or 5 adults. There's just no way I was rendered incompetent. So we had to figure out strategies to kind of pull people together and capitalize on some of the resources within the buildings that are there. Um, I also think it's a nice way for, if you're working in an area where you have a large geographical region and you can have, one person in one rural district, another person in another rural district, you meet with them together via Zoom and say, okay, I can't get to you, but I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you a tool, some quality indicators or the ALCOT or whatever you choose. Let's come back and talk about what your strengths were. What would that look like as a goal? Okay. And then then you have some opportunities for at least them to not be doing this in a vacuum. It's really easy when it's just you, the outsider, and them. They don't even know if you know what they're feeling, um, to let those relationships dwindle, especially, and sometimes it's on us. You can't get back there. You're supposed to call on a Friday and you're like, oh, I got held up because I got called somewhere else. And then as soon as that breaks, that just starts disintegrating
Yep.
the the relationship. So again, it gives them another person to talk about, you know,
Mhm.
in the loop when you're there.
I like that. It's really good.
I love that you mentioned that you were partnering teachers together. And I was remembering my initial experience teaching in an extensive support needs, and being able to go into another classroom, and seeing another teacher work, and how valuable it would have been had someone coached me to say, hey, this is what I want you to look for and see this other teacher do. Um, and how grounding it would have been to have looked through a protocol like this and known what I was looking for so that I could see a sample of it, even if I hadn't seen the whole thing, but just one section of it. And then I was reflecting on my experience as a mentor teacher in the induction program, or as a lead teacher when I had a student teacher come in, and how much of a better experience the mentor teacher, or a better mentor teacher I would have been had I positioned the students with me through a protocol like this. And what a valuable tool this could be through an induction program or through teacher professional development. How much I'd like to see that get into some of those programs.
This again, this came out of necessity because of the type of work we're doing, but it was definitely fed by. I was also part of one of our induction programs, the old K-tip in Kentucky, and they stopped funding that at some point. But again, the same thing. If I wish I would have had this when I was younger, because I could have sat down with the teachers. Okay, here's where we are. It's okay. You've only got so we've adjusted it. When we first made it, it was a yes or no. So our poor teachers would look at this and be like, "Oh, I only have 5 out of 37." So we found ways to make it softer. So, oh, you're partially right, and so that kind of eased the conversation. But absolutely, and I do think that I think that we're gonna. I would like. I don't know if it's gonna. I mean, I don't know if it's gonna happen, but I think there is gonna be more space or a necessity for induction models. I think universities are going to have to do better jobs of finding ways to work with districts. Maybe there could be even like, Department of Ed, universities, like twisted funding streams to be able to get people because we are generally failing in many ways, right? In this teacher preparation. It's like we get you out the door, you graduate, yes. And I say that even here, like UK has really high standards for their teachers, but we still see folks who come out and we're like, what? This isn't how you were trained, in the program. And I think there's this, a long time ago there was this paper written, Stokes and Bear, talking about generalization. And the joke was, basically they looked at all the strategies people were using to um, promote generalization. And one of them was train and hope, right? And which was not the one that we want. But that's kind of what we're doing. We're training in hope, and oftentimes we never see those folks. So to be able to come back and actually have some sort of commitment to the district, some sort of blended funding structure where faculty are now have to be paid to do that, or universities have to pay. I don't know how that will be completely worked out. It's not my area of inquiry as much, but I think that's what's going to happen if we're going to ensure if universities are going to stay viable in a context where they're going to be now evaluated on the effectiveness of their teachers, but also to make sure that we're doing the right thing in terms of supporting our folks. Hi, Lisa. Nice to see your face. Glad you made it home safely.
Nice to see you. Thanks.
Lisa, what's PPS?
Portland Public Schools.
Okay, nice.
So I'm a state contract. We're part of PPS, but regionally, we serve 4 counties, 22 school districts, birth to 21, kids with complex, extensive support needs. One of the things that we've been wrestling with lately is the just what you talked about, communication, assistive technology, alternative augmentative communication. Um, we have an amazing team at Columbia Regional, but there's just not enough of them. It's like, there just isn't this capacity in the school districts to develop and support communication systems for kids that then they know how to generalize and how to use throughout the day, and then the kids can use at home and all that kind of stuff. So that really resonated with me when you were talking about kids' communication needs for sure.
Yeah, I think that I think that there is um a need to, well, obviously what I'm going to say is like the most basic thing. It needs to be prioritized. I mean, I'd pick for we should be evaluated not for our population. I would give up academic skills. Like if I could just make sure all of our kids communicate because they're proud. I wouldn't have to give it up. But what I'm saying is like it should be a part of our teacher evaluation. Like how many of the kids in your class that don't speak or have minimal vocal repertoires, how many of them have supports in place? And if it's less than 100%, then we're in trouble, right?
I
So
agree.
and I think another thing too is I do think that there are problems with mixed methodologies. And so like people come to communication intervention with different approaches. Um, and what I ask them to do is no matter if you've been doing something for 6 months, step back and watch the classroom. And if the child is not, or adult, young adult is not interacting without a teacher, structured activity, then we're not doing it right. And so some kids, what we should always be modeling devices, but for some kids, modeling is not enough. You're also going to have to prompt. You're going to have to use more fringe vocabulary. It's whatever it takes to get it started, and then we can make that system more robust over time. And I know people will disagree with that, but again, I see a lot of kids that will be using a device in a literacy activity, good modeling happening, but I never see that kid ever ask for anything, never say, hey, sit over there, never interact with their peers in a way that is conventional. And so I just think that we get stuck in the weeds sometimes. We know how to teach basic communication. It takes kind of the same skills as it does to teach a flashcard. Basically, we find an opportunity for a kid to be motivated. I stop and pause the door when we're going outside. I have the computer doesn't work. And then as soon as it's there, I prompt them the right response. They say it, or they hit a device, or they sign it, and then we get going. And the fact that kids don't have those, a lot of our kids don't have those skills is really troubling because it just means we're missing the boat somewhere. We've given the field, we've dumped everything on speech pathologists for what, 40 years now, and our kids still aren't communicating. So we have to find ways to build stronger, more robust teams where other people can jump in and support and so it's not just like it's not just a service, right? It's not just a therapy. It is the thing. It should be the focus of our programs and everything else layered in. So I know that was a little soapboxy and probably speaking to the choir, but I do think that waiting 6 or 8 months for a kid to finally learn how to use a device, but still can't ask for things in 6 or 8 months, that's insane. And most kids, we can get that, in a couple weeks started, but it's people just don't know how to do it or don't think it's their responsibility.
And Rob, I just want to echo something that both Lisa and you are saying. I loved what you said about taking a communication device from a student is a restraint. I wrote it down because I think so many times, and we see this in general education classrooms, we see this in any kind of classroom, but really in general education classrooms, when a student starts using the communication device in different ways, and people are thinking, oh, this is being disruptive, or this is something happening, and then they move the device away from the student. And I loved what you said, it's a restraint. You've just stopped a person from speaking or sharing or communicating or whatever, in the larger framework. And connected with that, and a lot of what I see in the ALCOT is, and you talked about this, that, a lot of times that debate that you talked about, inclusion versus segregation, segregated classrooms, full inclusion, all of that, gets stuck in the conversation around the placement, as opposed to thinking about what the student needs and how do we support the student towards independence. And it's interesting to me always that in that debate, a lot of times the against for being in an inclusive environment is the systematic instruction, or systematic, I think I'm pronouncing it right, the systematic instruction, and the belief that you can only do that in a separate location and in a segregated setting, and how that is absolutely not true. And how when you showed the visual of a classroom, of a just a regular classroom, to a person working in a regular environment, that how that's necessary. And if we don't build in that systematic instruction, which we know our students with complex needs is going to need in that inclusive setting, then we're going to see students not picking up those skills. So I just wanted to reiterate what you said, because I thought that was so powerful, and so many times is used as an argument against inclusive environments, inclusive classrooms, and general ed classrooms for our students with extensive support needs, because the belief is that systematic instruction cannot be provided in those settings.
And in full disclosure, I mean, that's not right, full disclosure, but I know that there are kids that have such come into our schools with so few skills that yeah, they need a little bit boosters, right? They need some support. Um, but it doesn't, I think the idea sometimes is that we have to teach so many skills, like there's a certain number of skills before kids can be included. And that's just not the case. It should be that for all kids to maximize where they're going to be, they have to learn inclusive settings. They just have to. And so again, we may do some pull out. We may have to do some intensive instruction to get kids to even stay in an area and get basic matching or caring about what other people are doing skills. But that should not be their whole program. And again, we should always have this level of worry, not tracks. It's like, I guess going back to that Mayo thing is like the segregated track should be always viewed as temporary. So there's and you guys all know it's the idea of once they're there and once they're in kindergarten, they never get out, right? And so that's what we have to break. We have to break that viewpoint that there still are tracks. I know this isn't new, and I have wonderful, talented people that live in inclusion all the time. I'm more of an instruction guy, like what makes sense in terms of making sure kids get what they need in terms of instruction. But that's what has to be completely disrupted is this idea that like because from a scientific perspective, if I teach you the color red on a flashcard, does not mean that you're gonna comment on a kid's nice red shirt or be able to find the red book in the library. That's like you have to be able to have those experiences to be able to use those skills and have any chance at agency and independence outside the classroom.
I
That's a
need
lot.
to run to a meeting, but I wanted to just ask a quick question. I may not be able to stay for the answer. Um, it seems like the tool is, yes, good for educators to think about educating kids with complex needs, but it seems like you don't have to use all of the details to make this tool work for all kids in general. So do you see that the tool is used more broadly also?
I I know that it has been used for kids with autism and without intellectual disability. So just for autism programming, but I don't know. I mean, people are like, oh yeah, and I do trainings to large special education groups and we talk broadly about it, but I don't know of groups like that are using it with kids with learning disabilities or other what we call high incidence, disabilities.
Yeah.
I'm sure they do. I mean, I can't say this. I'm not sure they do, but I mean, I'm sure every now and then a kid's in there that when they're using it. But yeah, it's primarily been used for kids with autism or kids with other low incidence disabilities. But
And I can
All
see
right.
how
I've got to run. Thank you.
I can see how just in response to that that once you're using with a certain group of students, and this becomes part of the way that I think as an instructor, as a teacher, there's no reason why I'm not thinking about my other students when I'm thinking about the things that are happening, because some of the things that you're talking about with communication partners, with other things, you're going to need to think about the other students in your classroom and how you are structurally and in their environment, placing the spaces for those peer partners, for the communication systems, for all of those things to be able to work. So you're going to need to think about your larger class environment as a whole, but keeping the focus towards our students with complex needs, I think is why I think this is extremely powerful, because a lot of times in our inclusion, general education classrooms, people struggle with trying to figure out how do you support teachers, special educators, general educators, paraprofessionals to understand how they might, what that instruction might look like, what might be the areas of priorities, what might be the areas of goals. And I believe that the work that you're doing helps people to be able to come in with that lens so that they can, like you said, coach them to get to the point that they need to get to as teachers and educators. So thank you. But
Welcome.
you were going to say something. Say,
Can
say,
I
say.
can I ask something? So
Yeah.
so at our agency, we just recently ordered the high leverage practices for extensive support needs. And so we're a group of like teachers of visually impaired, teachers of deaf blind, teachers of deaf hard of hearing, AAC folks, but yet we'll have a student that gets like all of our services and we're not communicating, right? And then we also have teachers across the board that they don't, we're trying to use, have them understand that idea of explicit instruction applies to everybody, right? So we were thinking about using that book as kind of like a year-long study for our teachers. They're all itinerant. Um, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, I would love it if there's like some kind of scope and sequence. Like, do you guys have anything that a companion that goes with that book in terms of like, other than just giving it to, no, it's such a great book. We're so excited.
It is. And I think I would think about, yes, because the book gives you a lot of those practices that I think are building on some of the things that Rob, the ALCOT kind of shares, like things that people should be thinking about. So having it as a tool of, this is where I am, but then what am I going to do with it? And coming up with those goals and objectives that
Are
teachers
they
need to
meant to
build on.
kind
No,
of?
they're not connected. But I'm just saying, but in my mind, when you started talking about it, being someone that has used the HLPs in inclusive classrooms, I can see how I would be able to build this together as two different components, because once I have seen where I'm at as a teacher with the ALCOT, then I could think about like picking certain, because like Rob showed, like goals and objectives that I might create for myself might include some of those things. Like, how am I going to do it now? Like, how am I going to bring in communication systems and build that into my instruction? So that might be places where I would pull information from the HLPs to help me create that plan that I need and then be able to be supported through that plan. But Rob, you were going to say something too.
No, absolutely. I mean, a lot of this came from, that is a edited book, so there are different, but we sat down with folks, and like the challenge in the HLPs was the original book. You had to do some more extrapolating for kids with more severe disabilities, right? It made sense to us if you knew, but for our folks, you're like, okay, what does metacognition mean for kids that have three words? Like, so we sat down with the chapter folks and did some brainstorming, like, okay, what do you think about this? And so some of that, again, it's just good practice. And that's where those HLP came from. What I was going to say, not HLP, the ALCOT. At the beginning of the talk, I just want to clarify too, like, it's a lot of the things in it are rooted in research-based practices, but there isn't research. We have never done the psychometric metric evaluations of it. So it can't be used like to evaluate. So just a clarification on that. It's just been a tool. Again, it's something that I made. I did a presentation on it. Attainment was like, hey, I really like this. I think, and then we did some iterations that worked over the years, and I found it a very useful tool and helping teachers. But again, in terms of evaluation part of it, it's not like the Danielson or something that you would use for like a broader evaluation. It's just a helping tool. But again, teachers after seeing like their larger state evaluation system, they see the outcome and like, oh, this makes sense. Okay. So that's the nice thing about it. Wow, we're over time.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much for everybody for
Thank
staying in it and for
you.
this amazing conversation. We will, as you know, we have recorded it. We will share it back with you. Feel free to share it with others. And we'll also pair it with the collab PD that Dr. Pennington just took us through quickly so that you can share it with others and kind of have them come back with questions. And thank you so much for sharing your email with us. And I can just say that Dr. Pennington has been wonderful to work with. So he is completely true when he's saying that reach out to him with questions because he will follow up. And again, thank you so much. Thank you all for your time.
Yeah, have a wonderful day. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. It was
Thank
nice to meet you.
you.
Bye.
Great conversation.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Good luck out there.